Welcome, Voyager. You found yourself once more at the edge of a map, where ink fades into mystery and tides carry whispers older than wind. Tonight, we drift toward a strange sweetness, not in the air or on the tongue of some poetic metaphor, but in the ocean itself. This isn't a story about mermaids or bottled messages. It's about the sea tasting like a river, far from any shore. A tale sailors once told with raised eyebrows and damp boots. A tale of fresh water where there should only be salt. Now, a quick word before we set sail. If you enjoy these sleepy geographic drifts and odd little corners of Earth's memory, give this story a like and leave a coordinate in the comments. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Perhaps your latitude and longitude hide their own strange story, waiting to be uncovered in a future voyage. And if your ocean ever tasted like spring water, well, we'll know you were near the Amazon. Take a breath now, Voyager. A slow one. Feel your body settle. Let your weight drift lower into the mattress or the chair or the hammock if you're lucky. Imagine the sound of water lapping gently at a hole. A breeze just warm enough to leave the skin cool, and the smell of rain still hanging in the air from somewhere upstream. Let your thoughts quiet. Let the map unfold in your mind. Our story tonight begins in a place where rivers run wide enough to be mistaken for oceans, and the ocean, sometimes, tastes like something else entirely. It starts with a ship and a sailor and a ladle dipped from the sea. They say it happened in the 1500s. Portuguese explorers, having braved the Atlantic, found themselves nearing the northeastern bulge of South America. Noses sunburned and salt thick, minds tuned only to waves and stars and the creaking complaints of wooden hulls. It was there, still days from landfall, that one of the sailors dipped a bucket overboard. He tasted the water, expecting brine. But what met his tongue was not the biting salt of the ocean. It was sweet and silty and alive with a taste of earth. The ocean, they realized, had turned to river, and they were nowhere near the mouth of the Amazon. This was no trick of thirst, nor hallucination born of sunstroke. It was the river sea, the Rio March, the Amazon, a river so vast, so powerful, that it pushes its freshwater plume nearly 200 miles into the Atlantic, diluting the salt and tinting the water with its earthy brown current. From space, the discharge appears as a liquid tongue, licking outward from the continent's mouth. On the sea's surface, it rolls in low, lazy undulations, like a continent of current afloat. It is said that the Amazon discharges over 200,000 cubic meters per second of water at its peak. That's more than the next 7 largest rivers combined. Imagine a river not like the Nile or the Mississippi, winding or snaking or cutting, but something more like a continent breathing outward, a liquid lung that exhales across the very Atlantic. That's what the sailors tasted. Some called it a miracle, others a confusion of mats. But among those who knew rivers and oceans both, it became a tale worth telling. The time the sea turned sweet. The phenomenon is real and still happens today. Modern sailors approaching Brazil sometimes notice the shift not just in taste, but in the color of the water and the behavior of marine life. Fish change, salinity meters scream. The clouds begin to build, thick and slow with humidity from the river's breath. This mixing of fresh and salt is called an estuarine plume. But this Amazonian plume is like none other on Earth. It stretches beyond visibility, curls and coils in satellite imagery, and fertilizes parts of the Atlantic with nutrients from forests thousands of kilometers inland. The river begins in the Andes, in Peru, not far from the peaks where condors wheel and mist clings like stories. Its source has been debated for decades, but one of its birthplaces lies high on the Nevado Mismi. From there, it flows eastward, carving paths through mountains, forests, floodplains, and cities. It gains strength from hundreds of tributaries, some longer than major European rivers, and becomes an empire of water. By the time it nears the sea, the Amazon isn't really a river anymore. It is a weather system, a force, a watery geography of its own, and it has moods. There are parts of the Amazon that rise and fall by 30 feet between rainy and dry seasons. Entire forests become submerged. Fish swim among tree trunks. Monkeys cling to floating logs. And pink river dolphins, real as the mist and twice as shy, surface in flooded clearings with breathy sighs. The Amazon's power isn't just in its volume, it's in what it carries. Sediment, yes, but also seeds, nutrients, spores, minerals from deep time, whispers of mountains, echoes of storms. The river feeds the sea, and the sea responds in kind. Together, they form a conversation ongoing that most of us never hear. But for those sailors, it began with a taste, an unexpected sweetness in a world of salt. Imagine the confusion, the quiet awe, after months of nothing but ocean, of predictable salt spray and dried out lips, to suddenly find the water soft, the color different, the smell of soil in the air. Some thought they had passed into another world, and maybe, in a way, they had. The boundary between sea and river is not a line but a blur, a dance of chemistry and current. It's like the change between dream and waking, not something you notice as it happens, only something you recognize in hindsight. And that's where we pause, just for a moment, right at that boundary. The first time the tongue told the truth before the map did. The first time water tasted like land, far from land itself. The sea, sweetened by memory, by river, by home. Let us drift a little deeper now, beyond the taste and into the feeling. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of that ship in 1531. The sun has long since climbed past the mast, and your hands ache from salt. You've not seen land in days, but you taste something different in the water, and it's enough to change your pace, to still your thoughts. You look over the edge of the boat, down into that impossible hue, where brownness flows like silk across the sea, like a secret carried from the heart of a jungle. You might squint, searching the horizon for a riverbank or some green edge of certainty, but the ocean stretches on, undisturbed. Yet still, something has changed. You've entered the territory of the Amazon. The river was once a mystery to the European imagination, a place hinted at in native accounts and glimpsed through veils of heat. When Vicente Yanez Pinzon first sailed up part of its estuary in 1500, the force of the current nearly shattered his expedition. He tried to anchor, but the river pushed back. His logbooks describe a sea that rose against them, not in waves, but in weight. This was not water that welcomed. It resisted. It is said the Amazon was once called the River of Doubt, fitting, perhaps, for a place that changed its name so often. But eventually, it was named after warrior women, those same fierce figures of Greek legend, because the conquistadors believed they had encountered tribes of female fighters along the river's edge. Fiction was always more comfortable than complexity, especially for those mapping the unknown. And so the river received a myth, as many rivers do, but the reality was greater, longer, heavier. The Amazon is not one river but hundreds, plaited and braided like hair, dark and dense and filled with secrets. Tributaries like the Rio Negro and the Madeira feed into it, creating a jungle so vast that entire nations disappear within its canopy. Some parts of the forest still remain uncontacted, unnamed, and possibly unaware of satellites and concrete and what lies beyond their green sky. The river system is so influential that it creates its own weather. Moisture from the Amazon basin helps to form clouds that travel across the Atlantic, reaching Africa and feeding the monsoon. In this way, the river is not just a regional force, it is planetary. A breath inhaled and exhaled across oceans. No wonder its mouth can change the sea. No wonder it can blur the lines between salt and fresh, between sea and land, between expectation and memory. Some early sailors, unsure what to make of the sweet sea, feared it. They wrote of strange fish, of sudden storms, of night skies that felt closer than they should. They spoke of the Bodo, the pink dolphin that some claimed could turn into a man. According to river lore, he would come ashore dressed in a white hat, seduce the women of the village, and then vanish before dawn, slipping back into the river like a ripple of light. Whether they believed it or not, these stories lingered, more comforting, perhaps, than the reality of water so vast and powerful that it could not be fought or tamed. Even modern sailors feel the weight of that passage. Approaching the Amazon by sea means entering a different world, where the wind grows heavy and the stars seem smudged. The river doesn't roar at its mouth. It hums, carries logs and roots and fragments of jungle. It stains the Atlantic with its presence. It makes the ocean remember the land. Imagine drifting into it slowly. The ship no longer feels the pull of ocean currents, but the river's tug. The salt on your lips fades. You taste something more like stone and tree and rain. You've passed into the realm of the freshwater plume. The phenomenon is measured now, with data points and salinity charts, tracked by satellite and mapped in seasonal variations. Scientists study its nutrient spread, its role in ocean productivity, even its contribution to carbon cycles. But all those numbers are just shapes made of symbols. What matters in the quiet of a night at sea is that the water no longer tastes like itself, and neither do you. There's a moment in long journeys when the traveler changes, not all at once, but bit by bit. A word mispronounced, a gesture borrowed, a memory reshaped by retelling. The sea changes too. Near the Amazon, it is changed from beneath, from the invisible current, the push of something old and weighty, the slow arrival of a continent's breath. This is how rivers remember, not just where they came from, but what they passed through. Mountains, valleys, villages, time. If you had dipped your cup into the Amazon at its mouth, you would have tasted Peru, tasted Bolivia, tasted Colombia. You would have tasted the Andes, the footsteps of jaguars, the roots of plants that no longer have names. And when that river reached the sea, it did not surrender. It kept flowing, even in defiance of salt, carved its shape into the Atlantic. And the sailors who crossed it briefly, unknowingly, were changed, even if they didn't know how. Some came back with maps that showed the river's mouth but not its heart. Some told stories of sweet water and strange skies. Others never returned, but all of them, for a moment, touched something vast. Not land, not sea, something in between. That place still exists. The river sea, the ocean, tasted and transformed. Our story now follows a man named Charles Marie de la Condamine, a French explorer who, in the 1730s, sailed deep into the Amazon, not from the Atlantic, but from its upper reaches in the Andes. He was part of a scientific mission to determine the shape of the Earth, to prove once and for all whether the planet was flatter at the poles or bulged at the equator. But like many who entered the Amazon with one goal, he left with another. The jungle changed his mind more than it yielded answers. He wrote of the river as if it were alive, unruly, unpredictable, and endless. He and his team faced illness, suspicion, heat, and the slow unraveling of certainty. And still, the river carried them. It always does. La Condamine eventually emerged from the forest months later, thinner, wiser, and full of stories. He brought back not just measurements, but wonder, accounts of rubber trees, curare poison, and lost cities buried in vines. He spoke of nights where the river gleamed like ink under moonlight and the forest whispered names he couldn't pronounce. He also confirmed what sailors had long suspected but could not explain, that the ocean near the Amazon turned soft, that for hundreds of miles fresh water held back salt, that the sea changed color and flavor and feeling, and it all came from within, from a river too wide to see across, too long to map fully, too deep in story to ever finish telling. Even today, satellites show the freshwater plume extending into the Atlantic like a ghost. Sometimes it spreads for over 300 kilometers, curling outward from the Brazilian coast, invisible to the eye but recorded in light and reflection. Oceanographers track its movement and its sediment load. Fishermen, however, still rely on the taste. They know when they've crossed it. They say the water grows quiet, birds gather, and the sea somehow feels like home. The Amazon is not the only river that pushes back the ocean. The Ganges, the Congo, the Mississippi, all leave their imprint. But only the Amazon does it with such scale, with such slow persistence, that even the Atlantic cannot resist. Its sediment alone accounts for a fifth of the world's freshwater entering the sea. That sediment builds new islands, stains the seabed, feeds phytoplankton, and shapes the coasts of the continent. But more than that, it tells a story of movement, of water never standing still. The people who live along the riverbanks call it other names: Solomois, Para, the river sea. It depends on where you are, which language you speak, and how close you've come to its center. To some, it is a road, to others, a wall, to many, a god, and still it flows. There is something quietly miraculous about a river so large that it creates its own weather, transforms its own boundaries, and tells time in flood and drought instead of hours. During the wet season, it rises until trees drown and birds perch on half-submerged branches. During the dry season, it retreats, revealing beaches and sandbars that never appear on maps. Children swim where fish once darted through treetops. Villagers move their homes with the current. No lines are fixed. The river is always drawing and erasing, and so is the sea. You see, Voyager, in all our talk of tides and charts, of measurements and maps, we sometimes forget that water is memory. It holds not just salt and silt, but story. When Portuguese sailors tasted the sea and found it sweet, they weren't just noting a quirk of geography. They were unknowingly sipping a continent's past. They were swallowing a jungle's breath, a glacier's melt, the trace of 1,000 forgotten storms. And so are we. Every time we sail or swim or listen to the hush of waves against a wooden hull, we enter that same communion. And if you've ever stood on a beach miles from the Amazon and felt the wind shift or the tide pull in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, maybe that too was the river reaching out. Because fresh water does not forget. It travels with purpose, like a story searching for someone to tell it. And now here we are, at the edge of the tale, where the ocean still tastes just a little different, where the air smells not of salt alone, but of soil and bark and time, where the stars above reflect in water that remembers trees. This is the place the sailors found. Not land, not sea, but something in between. A place that shouldn't exist and yet does. A line blurred, a flavor changed, a map redrawn. A reminder that not all borders are visible. That sometimes even the ocean yields to something gentler, something slower, something sweet. So if ever you find yourself adrift, unsure which way to sail, pause for a moment, taste the water, close your eyes, and listen for the river. It might just be near, still flowing, still carrying the world downstream, still reminding us that everything, in time, returns. Thank you, Voyager, for drifting with me through this strange soft current, where land becomes legend and rivers whisper across oceans. If you're still awake, I hope your dreams carry you gently through mirrored skies and freshwater tides to the next story. And if you're already asleep, Then may the next ship you sail know exactly where it's going, even when the maps do not. Until then, sleep well. Welcome, Voyager. On our final journey of the night, we follow the softest light, one that doesn't burn, but shimmers, along the skin of the ocean. You see, long before oceanographers and microscopes revealed the true culprits, ancient mariners believed the sea itself could feel, could sing, could shimmer with soul. They didn't call it bioluminescence back then, of course. They just called it alive. Maps were blank in many places, but the sea often needed no symbols to mark its mystery. Just the right tide, just the right night, and the waves would glow like fireflies beneath the hull. And every sailor swore it meant something. Oh, and here's a thought. If you've ever spilled glitter on a carpet, you'll understand why old sailors feared the sea. The sparkles just keep showing up. Only difference is, the ocean doesn't need sunlight to shine. If you're enjoying these slow drifts into forgotten geography, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a coordinate in the comments below. Let us know where you're listening from. Who knows, perhaps your shores too glow with stories. And if they do, they might just end up in one of these episodes. Now let the sails go slack. Let the wind settle. Let your shoulders ease and your thoughts ripple out like circles in still water. You're safe here, in the arms of the tide. Our story tonight begins softly, on a ship with no name. Only a date, September 1605, and a journal, discovered in the archives of Lisbon, written in the cracked ink of a Portuguese navigator. The captain was heading west, into the Atlantic, toward the shoulder of South America, chasing rumors of freshwater mirages and floating jumbles. The log opens with silence. Not a single mention of wind, just heat and a description of the sea. Flat as a mirror, yet glowing beneath, he wrote. No stars above could match the ones below. The crew believed it to be a sign. Some whispered it was St. Elmo's fire drifting into the sea. Others, more nervously, believed they'd crossed some invisible boundary, where the ocean became something else entirely. That's the thing about the bioluminescent ocean. It doesn't roar or crash or shout. It waits. It brushes the edge of a hull with light like velvet, like a sigh, clings to oars, to rudders, to wake. And in that part of the Atlantic, especially near the mouth of the Amazon River, the glow wasn't occasional. It was constant. For hundreds of miles, the river spills fresh water into the salt, and in that nutrient-rich soup, life blooms and glows. Microscopic plankton called dinoflagellates produce light when disturbed. So every touch, every splash, every whisper of current lights them up. But to the sailors who had no microscopes, no petri dishes, only wooden planks and moonlight, it felt supernatural. In Chinese records from the Tang Dynasty, ocean glow was recorded too. They called it fire in the water. And Arabic navigators, drifting between India and the Persian Gulf, described nights where the wake behind their ships shimmered like molten silver. Some thought it was ghosts. Some thought it was the souls of drowned men guiding the living. And some, like our Portuguese captain, just rode it down and stared into the waves without blinking. As his ship drifted further west, the glow grew brighter. At night, it shimmered in the ship's trail, outlining every ripple. Fish darting beneath the surface left glowing trails, as if drawn in invisible chalk. The sailors began to watch silently, no longer joking, no longer fearful, but mesmerized. By the fifth day, the journal mentions the sea singing. Of course, scientifically, this may have been the groaning of the hull or the whine of the wind in the rigging. But paired with the glowing sea, it was enough to draw the crew into reverence. And on the sixth night, something stranger still. The navigator records a sudden glowing bloom around the ship. Not a trail, but a whole perimeter, as if they'd entered a ring of fireflies. Like the ocean breathed, he wrote, and exhaled light. Modern scientists now know of phenomena like Milky Seas, rare events where vast swathes of ocean can glow continuously for hours or days, covering thousands of square kilometers. Even satellites have spotted them, faint and ghostly, from orbit. But back then, all they had was the sight and the silence. That same year, 1605, further north, English sailors near the Caribbean reported bioluminescent waves. 2. One described fish that glowed like falling stars. In another account from 1753, a naturalist sailing past Sri Lanka described watching glowing patterns swirl around his ship like cursive letters being written by the sea itself. It wasn't until the 19th century that scientists began studying these lights seriously. Charles Darwin himself saw them during his voyage on the HMS Beagle. He dipped a net into the glowing water and brought up tiny crustaceans, wriggling and flashing. But even Darwin admitted, seeing it from above under a quiet sky was like watching the stars fall into the sea. And for sailors who relied on the moon and the stars to guide them, the thought of stars beneath their ship, reflected and scattered in plankton glow, felt like the sky itself was turning upside down. The following evening in the journal reveals a curious entry. The captain, now clearly enchanted or perhaps mildly unnerved, writes, "The men do not sleep. They sit on the deck, speaking softly. No dice games, no singing, just watching. Some say the ocean is watching back. It's strange, isn't it, how stillness can hold more power than movement. The glow beneath them never roared, never crashed. It simply was, pulsing gently in the folds of black water like the chest of something sleeping." As the crew entered the Sargasso Sea, named for the floating brown seaweed that mats its surface, the glow did not diminish. Instead, it changed character. Not streaks anymore, but patches, like clusters of stars woven into the ocean fabric. There's a peculiar hush to the Sargasso, a kind of timelessness. No major currents, little wind, just the slow drift of a ship across warm waters, and the gentle curl of seaweed against the hull. And within this floating world, certain species of bacteria and plankton, agitated by ship motion or swimming fish, produced their signature light. In modern terms, it's a chemical reaction, luciferin oxidized by luciferase. But in sailor speak, it was just sea fire. The journal notes a turning point. Rodrigo said it was like floating above the heavens, not below them. He dipped his hand into the sea and it came up lit. He laughed and said he was holding a star. That night, the navigator records a full ring of light, several meters wide, surrounding the ship. Every ripple lit up, like silver ink spilled on dark parchment. It wasn't until years later, upon review of similar logs across many voyages, that scholars would piece together a pattern. These glowing halos, sometimes described in the North Atlantic, sometimes near Indonesia, and once even in the Arctic. What all these events shared was heat, calm seas, high biological activity, and sailors who could never forget the sight. One Ottoman sailor's memoir, found in a dusty collection in Istanbul, describes an encounter off the coast of modern-day Somalia. "We crossed into waters where the sea became a lantern," he wrote. "The glow clung to our ship like a wedding veil, slow and soft, and when a fish jumped, it left fire in the sky." Centuries later, Scientists aboard the research vessel Malcolm Baldridge would document a Milky Sea event near the Arabian Sea in 1985. The glow was so intense that it was visible from the bridge without any artificial light. The scientists took samples and found colonies of luminous bacteria coating organic debris in the water, entire ecosystems of slow-burning fire. But even with all that knowledge, the wonder never quite leaves. Let's float back to our 1605 navigator, now 9 days adrift in the shimmer. Supplies were fine, no major storms, just the gentle creak of wood, the slap of a sail, and a hull surrounded by moving stars. At dawn on the 10th day, the glow vanished, as if it had never been. Just as quietly as it came, it receded. The sea turned steel gray. Fish returned to their normal shadowy selves. The men, too, seemed to retreat into themselves. A hush fell again, but this time, not from all, rather, from the slow return to the ordinary. The captain ends that section of his log with a final observation. We have crossed something, a bale perhaps. The men looked backward more than forward. In the centuries that followed, naturalists learned more about these lights. They found that bioluminescence is older than fish, older than mammals, older even than trees. A trick of survival, a way to lure prey, or confuse predators, or perhaps just a byproduct of a world that, in its quietest corners, still likes to whisper. The Tlingit people of the Pacific Northwest tell stories of canoes that ride along paths of sea fire, guided by ancestral spirits. The Maori tell of glowing shores lit by tanawa, guardians of the deep. And Japanese fishermen once believed that fireflies of the sea, Uamai-hataru, were souls lighting the path home. Everywhere that the ocean glowed, humans told stories. Because how could we not? The stars belonged to the heavens, but when they appeared in the sea, that belonged to us. Perhaps that's why the ocean's glow never fully became ordinary. Even after it was named and explained, it still feels like something sacred, something older than our maps, older than our languages. Tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine yourself floating on a warm sea. The water is smooth, like silk, and the sky above is indigo. You trail your hand over the edge of the boat and watch as it glows. Blue, white, a hint of green. A school of fish darts beneath you, lighting up in curved trails, like firework ribbons. And in the distance, just under the edge of your vision, the whole ocean is breathing. As the sea faded back to darkness, and the glowing water became just water again, something lingered among those who had witnessed it. Many of the sailors from that 1605 voyage would later describe the experience in different terms, not as something frightening or supernatural, but as something oddly tender, intimate even, a light that did not burn, but shimmered softly, not a warning but a welcome. Some never told anyone else. Some swore they'd only seen it in dreams. Others, when asked late in life, would grow quiet, eyes going distant, as if watching it replay in the memory of salt and night. But this glowing sea was not unique to them. In 2005, a U.S. Navy satellite captured an image off the coast of Somalia that would spark excitement among marine biologists. A 16,000 square kilometer patch of ocean was glowing, visible from space. It was one of the largest recorded bioluminescent events in history, and when sailors from nearby vessels were asked what they saw, their descriptions mirrored those from hundreds of years ago. A sea that gleamed like polished glass, glowed like starlight, and moved like something alive. The research vessel Song, dispatched years later to the same region, recorded a bloom of Vibrio harvii, a type of luminous bacteria that thrives on organic matter in warm, still waters. The scientists aboard collected samples, measured oxygen levels, tracked currents. But even with the data, they admitted it felt odd. A quiet reverence crept into their reports. They too said it didn't feel like science, felt like myth. And so this feeling, this glowing hush beneath the hull, keeps returning, century after century, like a lullaby that the ocean remembers how to sing. Some cultures called it the tears of drowned stars, others the breath of sea spirits, and still others believed it to be a gift, proof that even in the dark, light could bloom. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. There is science in it, yes, but also something sacred, something that ties sailors to their ships to the sea, and the sea to the stars above and within it. So tonight, we remember a different kind of map, not one drawn with ink and compass, but traced in the wake of glowing water, a path that disappears the moment it's made, but lingers in the heart long after. Imagine now you're aboard that ancient ship, drifting through the equator's still breath. The sail above you barely stirs. The ocean is a liquid mirror, and the stars below your feet are as clear as those above. You cannot tell where the sky ends and the sea begins. The men around you are silent, not from fear, but wonder. Someone leans over the edge and trails their fingers in the water. A ripple of blue follows, then another, then a school of fish, darting through the deep like silver shadows dipped in fire. There is no storm, no wind, only you and the gentle rocking of the hull, and a world softly glowing all around. A seabird cries somewhere far off. You cannot see it, but you can feel its wings cut through the air, the way one can feel silence before it speaks. In the centuries to come, the sea will do this again. Maybe tonight, maybe 100 years from now, maybe somewhere off the coast of Indonesia or Sri Lanka, or deep in the Gulf of Mexico. And someone else will see it and write it down and try to describe it and fail, because some things are not meant to be translated, only experienced. As we come to the end of our story, close your eyes and drift with me once more. The ship rocks beneath you, the ocean sighs, and around you light dances. The sea, after all, has always been full of stars. They just needed the dark to be seen. Good night, Voyager, and may your dreams be luminous. Welcome, Voyager. I see you've found your way to the shore again, that quiet place between land and dream, where stories gather like sea foam. Tonight, we trace the outline of an island, not drawn in ink but in sound. A hum, a note, a memory caught in a grain of sand. The tale begins on Eigg, a small island nestled in Scotland's Inner Hebrides, where some say the beaches sing when walked upon. Not metaphorically, not romantically, but physically, audibly, as if the earth beneath your feet were a musical instrument left behind by the gods and tuned only by time. Now, I know what you're thinking. What kind of sand sings? And does it take requests? Before we sink our thoughts too deeply into geological karaoke, do me a favor. If the soft journey brings you a little peace, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and dropping a coordinate in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're listening from, and if the winds of that place carry their own story, perhaps it'll drift into a future episode. So now, draw your blankets close, breathe as if your chest were filling with tide water, and let the weight of the world slip out through your shoulders. The wind has hushed, the fire has dimmed, and the only thing left moving are your thoughts, slowing like sails in the dusk. Our story tonight begins on a small beach tucked along the southern edge of Eigg, where the sea rolls in gentle murmurs, and the grains beneath your feet are unlike those found in any other corner of the Hebrides. They call it singing sand, though what it hums depends on how you walk. The tone can rise or fall with your stride, your weight, your speed. It's not a song composed by humans, but rather a note made of quartz, wind, and patience. Some say it hums in a low, whispery E-flat. Others hear something closer to the purring of the island itself. Aig, like many of its Hebridean sisters, is forged of volcanic memory and ancient basalt. It's a quiet place today with fewer than 200 permanent residents, yet it carries the gravity of older things, geological and mythological. Its cliffs were the weight of time, and its beaches have heard footsteps since before Scotland was called Scotland. But back to the sand. For sand to sing, it must be shaped just right. The grains must be almost perfectly round, uniform in size, and free of too much dust or moisture. It's rare. These conditions occur in only about 30 places on Earth. And Aig, somehow, despite its wet climate and rugged coast, shelters one of them. Scholars, geologists, and curious wanderers have knelt there, pressing their ears low like children at a railroad track, listening not for engines, but for echo. The hum is faint, a private note. You'll miss it if you rush. You'll miss it if you doubt. The science behind it is precise, but the experience is not. The grains rub together just so, creating vibrations that travel up your heel into your spine. Feels alive, as if something underneath were remembering. Of course, this curious natural feature didn't go unnoticed by earlier visitors. The Celts once believed it was a sacred place, where the earth whispered truths if you listened with your feet. Some said the sands sang louder for the sorrowful, quieter for the content, a kind of empathy woven into geology. Later, Christian monks settled nearby and called the beach an Glen Cantariacht, the singing glen. They walked barefoot across it as a form of devotion, letting each step become a note, each note a prayer. But not all songs are peaceful. Some stories tell of stormy nights when the sand screamed, when winds roared from sky and waves crashed against Aig's black cliffs. The beach would sing, not with gentle tones, but with a shivering, shrill cry. It was said to be the voice of a banshee, warning the islanders of coming sorrow. There are letters, written in the 1700s, from travelers who described hearing this eerie chorus during storms. One speaks of standing at the edge of the beach, soaked and stunned, hearing a sound like a woman weeping into a flute. He left before dawn and never returned. The modern explanation, of course, is simpler. Acoustics, physics, pressure. But on this island, science and legend share the same bed. One lays the blanket, the other dreams beneath it, and Aig's past is stitched with both. For centuries, the island was passed between clans like a precious stone, or sometimes a cursed one. The MacDonalds ruled it for a time, as did the MacLeans. Their feuds shaped the land just as surely as the waves did. There's a dark tale often whispered about the Cave of Francis, a deep, hidden cleft along the coast where, in 1577, nearly the entire MacDonald population of the island was massacred by the MacLeans. They were discovered hiding inside, and the entrance was blocked with burning thatch. All 395 souls perished. Some say that, on certain fog-heavy nights, when the tide pulls back and the air turns saltier than usual, the sand sings not from joy, but remembrance, that its hum is not a melody but a murmur of mourning. Still, the island lives on. Today, Aig is a place of quiet resistance. It was among the first in the world to run entirely on renewable energy. The residents own their land collectively. It is an island that hums even in governance. The beach still sings, not every day and not for everyone, but for those who come gently, who listen kindly, the music remains. So perhaps it's not such a stretch to believe the sand has a soul. After all, What is a lullaby but a series of soft promises carried across time? And here, on this remote strand, where seabirds write cursive across the clouds and the mountains of Rum sit just offshore like sleeping giants, it seems only fitting that even the ground beneath your toes would want to tell you a story. And so we listen, just as those before us did, just as the sea always has. If you rise early on the Isle of Ig, before the gulls shake loose their morning cries and the tide has gathered its thoughts, you might find yourself walking the sands of Lake Bay. The sun moves slowly there, spreading itself like cream across the sky that rarely stays still. The light is silver, then golden, then silver again. You won't notice a change unless you're very quiet, and that's when you'll hear it. Perhaps only a hush beneath your steps, or a breath you didn't take, maybe even a small note lingering in the soles of your feet, like a lullaby you once knew but can no longer place. This is when the beach becomes more than beach. It becomes memory. It becomes story. There are islanders who swear the beach sings louder after long periods of drought, when the grains are dry and loose like a shaken tambourine. Children once tried to make the sand sing on command by dragging their heels in loops and circles, like they were drawing with noise. They were scolded lovingly and told that the island hums when it wants to, not when it's asked. And maybe that's part of the enchantment, this refusal to perform. Ig is an island with a mind of its own. For centuries, it has been the subject of maps drawn with more imagination than precision. Medieval cartographers often exaggerated its size, confused its orientation, or misplaced it entirely. In a 16th century atlas by Ortelius, the island appears almost tear-shaped, floating just west of Skye, and is labeled Aegea, a spelling both romantic and incorrect. But I didn't seem to mind. Its hills still rolled, its sheep still grazed, and its cliffs still caught the wind in the folds of their basalt. The people of Ig lived by rhythms older than ink. They farmed, they fished, they told stories, and sometimes, in the soft hour between day and night, they walked the beach and listened for its song. One story, still whispered by the few who remember it, tells of a wandering fiddler who came to Ig one autumn evening, long ago. He played for his supper and played for the stars, wandering the island with no home but the bow and strings he carried on his back. He spent a night in the hills, and when morning broke, he came to Lake Bay. The tide was low, the sand dry. He stepped onto the beach and froze, not from fear, but wonder, for beneath his feet, the sand hummed, a low, resonant tone that seemed to answer his every step. And so he played. He took out his fiddle and matched the hum with his bow, creating a duet between man and earth. They say the music echoed for hours, wrapping the island in sound so pure that even the birds stopped to listen. When the tide returned and swallowed the beach once more, he vanished. Some say he left for Skye. Others claim he melted into the rocks like a note held too long. The fiddler was never seen again, but his music, they say, lingers. On certain days, if you listen carefully, the sand doesn't just sing, it plays. Science, of course, offers a less lyrical explanation. The singing occurs when the grains shift in just the right alignment, typically during shearing, such as when someone steps or slides across them. The vibrations resonate within the thin layer of dry sand near the surface, producing an audible sound that travels short distances. There are studies. There are terms: grain size distribution, threshold velocity, shear force. But none of these capture what it feels like to walk on that beach at twilight, when the mist rolls in like parchment unrolling across the sea, and the horizon blurs until you're not sure which way is sky and which way is ocean. In that moment, the scientific fades. What remains is presence. You are not just walking, you are being walked with. Even the myths here walk softly. There is one, old and weathered as the stones of Massacre Cave. that speaks of the island's heartbeat. It says that the earth, once long ago, sent out pulses of life through certain chosen places: wells, forests, mountains, beaches. On Ig, the pulse took root in the sand. And when the world grows too noisy, too fast, the beach hums to remind us of what still beats beneath our feet. Now, whether you believe that or not isn't the point. The point is that stories cling to places like mist clings to moor. Some stay for centuries, some only visit once, and sometimes the very land beneath you wants to be remembered. Near Lake Bay, there's a crooked fence post, weathered gray, barely holding its own weight. No one's sure who built it, but carved faintly into the grain are 3 letters: SAN. Some say it was meant to spell sand. Others say it was short for sanctuary. But if you trace your fingers across the wood, the letters feel more like a whisper than a word. There's comfort in that, I think. Not all messages are loud. Some drift just under the surface, like the hum beneath your toes on a beach that refuses to be ordinary. And when you leave Ig, whether after a day or a decade, you carry something with you. It might be the smell of seaweed, or the sound of gulls arguing overhead, or the way the clouds hover so low they seem to nudge the hills. Or maybe it's the music, faint sure, but waiting, like a tune you can almost remember. Almost. Our story tonight nears its close with the final footsteps along the singing shore. By now, dusk has deepened. The sky above Ig is stitched with salmon-colored streaks, pale orange braided through soft blue, all mirrored in the wet curve of the beach. The tide rolls back slowly, hesitantly, as though reluctant to cover the song it just unveiled. You might pause here for just a moment and look behind. There are no footprints. The sand, fine and wind-blown, smooths itself swiftly, reclaiming its calm. It's as if you were never there, though the memory still clings to the air like salt. Isn't it strange how the earth forgets our weight so quickly, while we carry it for the rest of our lives? Ig has always lived between memory and erasure. It is a place that holds things quietly. The caves hold the sorrow of ancient feuds, their stone mouths sealed with wind. The cliffs remember storms that had no names, but sharp teeth. And the beach remembers, not in words, but in vibration. Many centuries ago, Gaelic poets sang of the voices in the earth, and how some places, if listened to gently, would tell you what the wind cannot. It was said that the bards who lived on islands like Ig had to learn silence before they could ever learn song. That's why, to this day, those who know the island best speak with long pauses. It's not hesitance, but reverence. They are waiting for the ground to finish its thought. One such man was Fergus McRae, a lighthouse keeper who retired to Ig in the early 1900s. He came from Barra, with wind-whipped cheeks and a voice like tide-swollen kelp. He never married, though some said he was once in love with a woman from Cull who only wrote him in Gaelic and only when the moon was full. He built himself a modest home not far from Lake Bay, and every evening he'd walk the shoreline, dragging a bit of driftwood behind him, not for firewood, but for music. He swore the sand hummed louder if you invited it. McRae kept journals, 3 of them, bound in salt-stained leather. In one, he wrote of a note beneath the heels, low and long, like the final breath of a cello. He believed the beach held a kind of memory, and each step was a note in a song too ancient to be composed. Years after his passing, his journals were found tucked in the floorboards beneath a woolen blanket and a perfectly folded map of the Inner Hebrides. On the last page of the final journal, he wrote a line that still appears today on the Ig Heritage Center's wall. Some islands speak in light, others in rain. Ig sings. It sings in quiet, in rhythm, in tones beneath the conscious ear, and the world has slowly started to notice. In recent years, Geologists have revisited Ike's singing sands with more precise instruments, measuring acoustic frequencies and documenting conditions under which the sound manifests. Some say the pitch averages between 500 and 700 Hz, with variations depending on humidity, grain shape, and atmospheric pressure. But others, more enchanted than exacting, still believe it's a voice, a warning, comfort, a cradle, maybe all three, because while we chase stars and decipher maps and try to anchor ourselves with coordinates, the island simply waits. It does not require understanding, only presence. There's a story, half legend, half lullaby, told by some of the older islanders. It says that if you fall asleep on the beach during the equinox, when day and night are equal in weight, you'll dream of the sea turning to glass and the wind humming lullabies that sound like names you've forgotten. When you wake, your footprints will be gone, but you will hear something beneath your ribs, a low, vibrating tone, almost like a song. So, before you drift away, sweet voyager, consider this. Not every place that sings is loud, not every song has a melody, and not every beach leaves your feet wet. Some linger in memory alone, like Ike, where the sands hum softly, the cliffs lean into mist, and the sky folds itself down into your palm like a page still warm from the sun. Thank you for sailing with me tonight. If your journey brings you close to 56.8833 degrees north, 6.1333 degrees west, stop a while, walk gently, and listen. And if you're listening from somewhere strange, or lovely, or filled with its own quiet music, leave your coordinate in the comments. Who knows, your corner of the world might be the next lullaby we follow. Sleep well. Let the island sing you home. Welcome, Voyager. You've arrived just in time. The deck is quiet, the ropes are still, and the stars above are stitched like secrets into the canvas of night. You're here for another drift through a forgotten corner of history, one bound not by borders or battle lines, but by something far older: cordage, coiling, and the quiet language of knots. Tonight's story is about sailors who spoke not with words but with rope, about the messages they tied, the emotions they looped and tucked away inside twisted hemp and flax, hidden in plain sight, a soft-spoken tale of gesture and tradition, passed from calloused hands to open sky, one hitch at a time. You know, for all the fancy terms in cartography, I still think bowlin sounds more like a sailor trying to name a pet owl. Surely, I can't be the only one who thinks that. Anyway, before we begin, I invite you to like this video and subscribe if this kind of drift suits your evenings. Drop a coordinate in the comments to let me know where you're listening from. Who knows, perhaps your own patch of coastline has its own tale of tangled rope, waiting to be unfurled in a future episode. Now take a breath, let your shoulders ease, feel the warm wood beneath your feet, or maybe just the hush of the room you're in, the soft rhythm of your breath, like the tide slipping quietly over the shore. You're safe here, and now let us begin. Our story tonight sets sail at the edge of the 17th century, aboard a modest merchant ship bound for the Canary Islands, its hull packed with barrels of salt cod, dried oranges, and a spattering of letters sealed in wax, none of which could tell you more than a length of knotted rope left behind on the deck. The sailor who tied it was named Elias. He didn't speak much, didn't read either, but he knew how to splice, to lash, to bend and whip and coil. And he knew something else too, that knots could carry things language couldn't. At sea, where every inch of line could mean the difference between calm and chaos, rope wasn't just rope. It was memory, a logbook you could feel, a diary in your hands. The first knots most sailors learned were practical. Reef knots for sails, clove hitches for tying off, figure eights for stopping lines from slipping. But over time, those same hands began weaving other patterns too. Decorative, yes, but also deliberate. A Turk's head knot, tied around a tiller or rail, could mean luck or protection. If it was wound a certain way, twice over with a counter loop, it might be a sign of grief. Tied with two colors, perhaps it whispered of longing. No one ever said these meanings aloud. They were understood like weather, felt, not spoken. Some knots told of a lost crewmate, others of a promise made before departure. A monkey's fist weighted with lead might mark a grave cast overboard. A lanyard braided in 3 strands could carry a name home when the ship could not. And Elias tied a knot for his brother, one who had vanished on a voyage south, beyond Gibraltar, into waters known for swallowing ships and scattering their parts. He didn't speak of it, didn't ask if others had heard news. He just sat near the bow at sunset and worked the same length of cord again and again. Over, under, twist, pull. One loop for memory, one for silence, one for salt. It was beautiful even though no one said so. Tucked into the cleat where he left it, the knot became part of the ship, weathered, grayed, sometimes frosted in dew. When he was transferred to another vessel months later, the knot remained. The crew that came after didn't untie it. Some said it was bad luck to touch another man's knot if it hadn't failed. Others just knew some things are meant to stay tied. This silent art of knot meaning was never formalized. There was no manual, but if you sailed long enough, you learned to read it like you'd read cloud cover or the creak of a mast. It was the language of shared space, of solitude in motion. The same knot could mean different things to different crews, just as a lull in the wind could mean peace to one and warning to another. In Polynesia, navigators tied shells into strands of coconut fiber to chart currents and islands. In Japan, sacred Shimenawa ropes were used to mark purity and ward off spirits, their ties braided thick with centuries of reverence. In Andean culture, the Inca recorded vast records using quipu, colored cords knotted in sequences to represent census data, tribute, and even poetry. And so, in this way, the act of knotting became something more than mechanical. It became sacred. A sailor might not speak the same language as the man beside him, but if the knots he tied were tight, clean, and balanced, trust was earned. Trust held ships together just as surely as rope, and messages slipped through the gaps. There are stories, whispered by dockhands and passed from harbor master to cabin boy, of sailors who left elaborate knots for lovers on shore, hidden in coils tucked beneath lanterns. Each pattern meant something different. I'm safe. I'll return. I saw something no man should. Some even say entire sentences could be built into the folds if your hands knew the grammar of rope. It might sound like fantasy, but consider this. Morse code was born of dots and dashes carried through wires. Semaphore with arms held high. Braille pressed into paper. Why not knots? Why not a language built on the twist of fibers and the memory of hands? One sailor, a woman named Mariella who served aboard a Swedish whaling vessel in 1802, kept a journal of the knots she tied. Each entry was described only by a sketch and a short note. Storm near Greenland, fear, or red sky in the west, miss home, or simply nodded again. Still no answer. When her ship was lost near Svalbard, The journal washed up weeks later inside a floating cask, wrapped in oilskin. Not a word was spoken, but every knot was read. Mariella's knots were eventually archived in a maritime museum in Gothenburg, but few visitors understood what they were looking at. To the untrained eye, they seemed decorative, maybe even whimsical. Yet to those who had spent enough nights at sea, who had known the loneliness of long voyages and the weight of the horizon, the shape spoke volumes. Some visitors claimed that when they stood before the glass case, they felt a strange pull in their hands, as if their fingers remembered something their minds had forgotten. The twist of cord, the pull of sinew and intention, muscle memory of an old grief. This idea that knots could carry sentiment continued to ripple quietly through history. In the 19th century, Victorian sailors began crafting what they called sailors' valentines. These were intricate, symmetrical designs made of seashells, rope, and tiny messages woven through braids, often sold or gifted upon return. Some were meant for sweethearts, others were tributes to those who never made it back. Hidden among the lacework, there might be a tiny reef knot tied in black thread, a subtle sign of mourning, or a figure eight laid beneath a rose shell, meaning safe passage. When shipping routes expanded and trade surged across the Atlantic and Pacific, knotwork became part of maritime identity. Merchant vessels and Navy ships alike developed their own variations, small gestures of recognition, like a dialect within a dialect. On some ships, new recruits were given a single piece of cordage during their first week, told to tie what they felt. There were no instructions, no rules, only that the knot had to be theirs. The results were strange and beautiful. One recruit, homesick and overwhelmed, tied a sequence of half-hitches so dense they formed a coil that resembled a snail shell. He carried it in his pocket for 5 years. When he left the service, he gave it to the ship's cook without a word. The cook, in turn, tied a single loop of it into the rigging so it would always catch the morning light. Some knots were meant to disappear, tied and cast into the sea at the end of a voyage, like whispered confessions. Others were worn as charms, wrapped around wrists or tucked into hatbands. It is said that on some coasts, if you found a scrap of rope braided and left at your doorstep, it meant someone was asking for forgiveness. The direction of the braid determined whether it came from a friend, a lover, or someone who had hurt you deeply. In this way, knots became a way to speak when the tongue was too tired or the heart too full. And still, through all of this, Elias's knot endured. Long after he was gone, his weathered twist of rope sat quietly on that ship's bow, overlooked by many, revered by a few. Sailors who noticed it often paused, running their fingers over the frayed ends, as if hoping to learn its story by touch. No one untied it, not even when the vessel was sold to a new owner and renamed, not even when it was dry docked in Lisbon for repairs, the deck stripped and polished. The knot remained. One of the shipwrights working the restoration, an older man named Tomas, recognized the knot from his own days at sea. Not the specific pattern, but the intent. He tied one just like it after surviving a cyclone near Madagascar. To him, it looked like a knot of silence, of something held and not yet released. And so he spoke gently to it, as one might to an old friend, and varnished the wood around it instead of over it. When the ship sailed again, the knot went with it, unnoticed by most, a whisper braided into the journey. Meanwhile, on another ship half the world away, a different kind of knot was being tied. This one was made by a sailor named Nilo, aboard a Portuguese packet ship running between Goa and Lisbon. Nilo was known for his quick hands and quieter thoughts. He rarely drank, never swore, and was often found seated near the stern with lengths of rope in his lap, his fingers weaving like a silent prayer. He tied knots that no one else recognized, one in the shape of a wave curling back on itself, Another like a star collapsed inward. When asked what they meant, he only smiled and said, "Messages for the ocean." One day, while becalmed off the coast of Morocco, he knotted a short line of silk cord into a perfect spiral and tied it to a lantern hook. That night, a storm rolled in without warning, and the captain credited the knot for holding back the worst of it. The next morning, the knot was gone. Only a frayed end fluttered from the hook, as if the sea had accepted the message and sent its own in return. Back on land, these traditions faded slowly. The rise of steamships and modern communication eroded the need for silence to be dressed in rope. Morse code replaced gesture. Radios hummed with voices. Ropes became synthetic, mass-produced, impersonal. But in quiet corners of the world, the old language lingered. In a museum drawer in Plymouth, there's a sailor's log with a knot pressed flat between its pages, dated 1823. The accompanying entry says only, "She said yes." On a beach in Nova Scotia, driftwood often washes ashore with knots still attached, some tarred black, others bleached bone white. No one knows where they come from, but locals collect them, tying them to fence posts and docks, small shrines to the stories that rode in on the tide. And in some places, knots are still used to say what words cannot. In therapy rooms, survivors of maritime trauma sometimes work with rope as a way of unlocking memory. Each twist, each loop, evokes a rhythm older than language, a way to tell the story without needing to speak, a way to remember, a way to let go. In the end, perhaps that's what all knots are: held moments, a pause in the rush, a way to anchor time. They don't last forever. Saltwater frays them, wind loosens them, and fingers forget their path. But while they hold, they speak. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, you can still hear them. The whisper of Elias's rope on the wind, the spiral Nilo sent into the storm, the half-forgotten twist of someone's love left behind in a drawer, waiting, still. Our story drifts now into the early 20th century, when old sea tales began to find their way into books instead of log journals, and rope began to yield to steel cables and radio waves. But even as modernity swept across the oceans, the quiet language of knots endured in small, personal ways. In 1913, a young Swedish cartographer named Lovisa Sjöberg set sail, with a crew tasked with charting the unmarked edges of Svalbard. She was no sailor, but she carried with her a fascination with rope work, something she'd learned from her grandfather, who tied tiny knots into napkin corners at family dinners just to keep his hands busy. When storms rolled in and the cartography team found themselves anchored for days in a frozen bay, Lovisa passed the time creating what she called knotted maps. Each knot stood for a fjord, a cape, or an island she'd seen. It was useless for actual navigation, of course, but to her it was a kind of tactile memory, a geography of touch. She tied one long strand to chart their entire journey. It now sits preserved in a museum in Oslo. It looks like nothing more than a ball of tangled yarn at first glance. But to Lovisa, every twist was a story, every loop a longitude, and as the century wore on, others followed suit. During World War II, British naval codebreakers at Bletchley Park reportedly experimented with knot ciphers, simple sequences sailors could memorize and hide, woven into their bootlaces or pack cords, in case paper messages were too dangerous to carry. Most of those techniques were never declassified. The only clue left behind was a single entry in a naval diary. For square knots, then a slip. If I don't come back, follow the rope. Back at sea, knots continued their quiet work. They held rigging. They secured sails. But every now and then, someone would pause before tying one, letting their fingers linger a moment longer than necessary, as if remembering an older purpose. In the port town of Essaouira, Morocco, Fishermen still gather before dawn and tie small knots into their nets before casting off. One, they say, is for the sea's patience, another for a safe return, a third for someone they miss. No one talks about it much. It's just done, like lighting a candle or checking the weather. Even today, a few sailors carry old knots in their pockets. Tiny, polished things made of leather cord or thick cotton, passed down from a father or found on the deck of a forgotten ship. Some say if you keep one in your pocket during a crossing, you'll never lose your way. Others say it helps you dream of land when you're far from it. But most say nothing at all. They just carry the knots. Let them rest there, like a song hummed too softly to be heard. Because a knot, in the end, is a moment folded into shape. It doesn't demand to be understood. It only asks to be held. And maybe, in a world that speaks too much and listens too little, that's the kindest kind of message. We close now on one final thread, drifting through time to a small island in the Azores, where a retired sailor named Enrique lives with a dog, a kettle, and a wall of ropes. Each rope has a name. Fernando, he says, pointing to a tight loop of braided blue hemp. He was my best friend in Madeira, always told jokes. Died at sea in '78. And that one, that's Lucia, my sister. She made the best rice pudding in the hemisphere. The ropes aren't from the people themselves, of course, but they hold the stories. Enrique ties one each year on the same day, his fingers slow now, but precise. The wall is crowded with loops and hitches and spirals. His memory, his library. He doesn't write letters. He sends knots to family across the ocean. No one unties them. They just hang them in windows like wind chimes without sound. And when the breeze moves through, the ropes sway gently, as if remembering. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the world grows soft around the edges, I invite you to imagine a single rope in your hands. Nothing heavy, just a line of soft twine, worn by salt and time. Close your eyes and feel it. The weight of memory, the warmth of touch. The knot you tie is yours alone. It doesn't have to mean anything to anyone else. You don't need to explain it, only to tie it. Loop, pull, twist, breathe, like the old sailors did. Let the world go quiet for a while. And if, someday, someone finds you're not lying in a drawer or washing up on a beach, maybe they'll hold it the way you once did. And maybe, just maybe, they'll understand that someone long ago had something to say and said it beautifully with their hands. Thank you for drifting with me through rope and tide, through memory tied in fiber. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the story. Don't forget to drop your coordinate in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from. Maybe a ship once sailed past your shore, or maybe a knot was tied in your town. Like and subscribe if you haven't yet. It helps me know which direction the wind is blowing. Sleep well, Voyager, and may your dreams be gently knotted with wonder.